Fatima will be handling translations moving forward, Evan added, gesturing to the young woman at the far end of the table. She adjusted her earpiece with shaking hands. The next exchange from Arafid's lead negotiator landed awkwardly. Half the sentence translated. The rest trailed off. They didn't even wait until the meeting ended. "Leora," Evan Price said, leaning forward so his voice carried across the polished oak table. "Your position is no longer needed. HR will meet you downstairs." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. The translation headset was still warm in my hands. Moments earlier, I had finished relaying a delicate statement from Rafid Holdings' chief negotiator, one that could have turned the tide of our $2.5 billion deal. Now, every pair of eyes in the room, American, Saudi, and otherwise, was on me. A week ago, Evan had pulled me aside after a late-night prep session. "You'll be right there next to me for the signing, Leora. This will be a historic day for the company." I'd believed him. For 12 years. I'd believed loyalty worked both ways. I was Weston & Daughtry's executive assistant to the CEO, but that title didn't tell the whole story. I was the bridge between this company and the Gulf region, the only one who spoke Arabic fluently, the only one trusted to translate nuance without losing meaning. Deals had lived or died on a single phrase I delivered. I'd worked through midnight calls, cultural misunderstandings, tense silences, and handshake agreements that no lawyer could script. My reward, apparently, was a public execution in the middle of a negotiation. Evan Price was the antithesis of everything I'd built here. Fresh from an Ivy League MBA, he valued speed over precision, templates over relationships. Where I saw people, he saw leverage. Where I heard layered meaning, he heard words to be cut down for efficiency. And now, in front of our most important client, he decided I was replaceable. A faint crease formed on the Saudi chairman's forehead. He switched his gaze from Fatima back to me, as if confirming what had just changed. I said nothing. My pulse thudded, but my expression stayed still. I'd learned long ago that silence, in the right moment, could be louder than outrage. And right now, silence was all I needed. I still remember my first day at Weston & Daughtry, walking into the glass-walled lobby with a second-hand briefcase. My Arabic-English dictionary tucked under my arm like a secret weapon. Back then, I was just a junior assistant to a senior negotiator, tasked with pouring coffee, taking notes, and, if I was lucky, translating small talk during client visits. I didn't know it then, but every small talk phrase I translated was building a bridge no one else in this company could cross. Over time, I became the person they called when deals got stuck. My fluency wasn't just in the language, it was in the culture, the rhythms, the unspoken pauses. In the Gulf, a wrong word could cost millions. A well-placed proverb could seal a partnership. I had learned both the hard way and the respectful way. The moment I'll never forget happened in my 5th year. We were in Riyadh, in a room that smelled faintly of cardamom coffee and new leather. The contract on the table was worth $400 million and it was slipping away fast. The lead negotiator from our side had just compared the deal to a camel chasing the sun. In English, it sounded poetic. In Arabic, in that dialect, it meant a fool chasing something he'll never catch. I saw the flicker in the chairman's eyes. The deal was seconds from collapsing. I didn't ask permission. I stepped forward, laughed softly, and said in Arabic, "Better a camel chasing the sun than a merchant without shade." It was an old saying in his province, a nod to ambition with dignity. The room shifted, shoulders relaxed. The chairman chuckled, repeated the phrase, and signed the preliminary agreement on the spot. $400 million, saved in 5 seconds. And yet, that story never made it into the quarterly report. My name wasn't on the success memo. The credit went to team effort, which, in corporate language, meant the men at the head of the table. It wasn't just that one time. I'd untangled a mistranslation in a customs regulation that kept $60 million in goods from being seized at port. I'd restructured a contract clause so it honored both U.S. law and Islamic banking principles. I'd sat through Ramadan nights to ensure midnight calls landed exactly at the right moment in Mecca's time zone. 12 years of this, of carrying a company's trust across languages, continents, and cultures, had made me proud. Not just proud of the deals, but of the invisible thread I wove between two worlds. But pride has a sharp edge when it isn't matched with recognition. Every win was stamped with the company's name. Not mine. Every problem I solved disappeared into someone else's resume. And now, after all those years, I'd been told, publicly, that my position was no longer needed. The pride was still there, buried deep. But it was tangled now, wrapped tight with something heavier, colder. Evan Price arrived in the spring of my 9th year at Weston and Daughtry, sweeping in like a headline in a glossy business magazine. He had the Ivy League degree, the tailored Navy suits, and the kind of resume that made board members beam. From the first meeting, it was clear he'd been brought in to modernize our international operations. To Evan, modernization meant stripping away anything he couldn't quantify. Language? He saw it as a decorative flourish, nice to have, but unnecessary if you had airtight contract templates. Relationships? In his mind, those were outdated relics, slower than email chains and less reliable than a binding clause. Our first real clash came during a draft review for a partnership in Bahrain. Evan skimmed through the Arabic section like it was an afterthought, signed the draft, and sent it off for finalization. What he didn't know, and what would have caused an immediate rejection, was that the document referred to a prohibited financial practice under Islamic law. I caught it on my way out of the office, my eyes tracing the phrase that could have derailed months of work. Quietly, I rewrote the section, rephrasing it to comply with Sharia-compliant banking standards, then resent the draft under his name. He never asked how the final version passed so smoothly. In fact, I doubt he even realized I'd touched it. I told myself it didn't matter. The deal went through. The company earned millions, and no one lost face. But it did matter. To me. Because the next week, I overheard Evan in the boardroom, his voice carrying through the half-open door. "We're streamlining," he was saying. "Too many moving parts slow us down. People like Leora, good intentions, but they get bogged down in the details. We don't need to handhold clients through cultural quirks. We just need signatures." I stood frozen in the hallway, folder in hand, my pulse ticking in my ears. Good intentions? Details? He'd just reduced 12 years of bridge building, of saving deals in 5-second intervals, to cultural quirks. I didn't confront him. There was nothing to gain from it, not then. But I filed the moment away, the way you tuck a shard of glass into a drawer. You know it's there. You know it can cut, from then on. Every meeting with Evan felt like walking a tightrope. He would push for speed. I would quietly ensure accuracy. He would send out documents half-read. I would catch the errors before they became public disasters. And always. He carried himself like the man pulling the strings, never noticing the hands that kept the whole operation from collapsing. The bickering never made it to the surface. My professionalism wouldn't allow it. But under the calm, under the polite nods and flawless translations, something in me was starting to coil tight. And Evan, in all his confidence, had no idea. By the time the Rafid deal reached its final stage, the numbers had stopped feeling real. $2.5 billion sat on the line, spread across a complex network of logistics contracts, supply chain commitments, and joint infrastructure development. I had been embedded in every step, not because my title required it, but because without my presence, the deal couldn't move forward. Rafid had a security protocol that was as much about respect as it was about risk management. Every phase of the agreement required voice print authentication in Arabic from the designated primary liaison, me. It wasn't just a password, it was a verification of trust. In their eyes, removing the liaison mid-process would be like swapping a groom at the altar. I took the responsibility seriously. Weeks before the signing, I'd begun preparing more than just my translations. I commissioned a handcrafted inlaid wooden box from a Riyadh artisan, the kind used for storing family heirlooms. Inside, I placed a selection of rare medjool dates wrapped in gold-threaded cloth. It wasn't just a gift. It was a signal that Weston and Daughtry understood the importance of tradition. Alongside the gift, I wrote a speech entirely in Arabic, not the sterile, literal translations Evan preferred, but something personal. It wove in regional proverbs, references to our shared history, and subtle affirmations of mutual respect. It was the kind of address that could make a chairman feel not just valued, but remembered. Still, I knew better than to assume anything was guaranteed. That's why, late one evening, while reviewing the master contract, I caught a clause buried deep in the legal language. It was an essential party continuity provision if the named liaison was replaced before the voice print sequence was complete. The agreement would automatically terminate. No renegotiations, no delays, just void. I didn't mention it to Evan, not because I wanted to see the deal fail, but because I'd learned something over the years. Power doesn't always come from making threats. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly where the floor is and who's standing too close to the edge. The next morning, during a prep session, Evan dismissed my proposed speech as too long and too sentimental. I smiled, slid my notes back into my folder, and let him talk about contract templates and efficiency metrics. He didn't notice that I wasn't arguing. Inside, I felt that steady, sharpened calm that comes when you're holding a card no one else at the table knows exists. I didn't plan on playing it, but if they forced my hand, I wouldn't hesitate. Thursday began like any other negotiation day, coffee gone cold beside a stack of annotated contracts. The faint hum of the air system in the boardroom. By 3:42 p.m., the air felt heavier, though maybe that was just me sensing the shift before it happened. I watched from my usual seat as the Rafid delegation settled in, their gold cufflinks catching the soft light. Beside Evan, Fatima, the new liaison, clutched my inlaid wooden box as if it were a misplaced prop. I'd spent weeks choosing that gift, crafting the words that should accompany it. Now, those words were in her hands, printed in my careful Arabic script. Evan cleared his throat. Before we begin the final review, a small presentation. Fatima stood. She read from my pages, but the rhythm faltered almost immediately. A misplaced vowel turned lasting trust into delayed trust. Another slip made honored partnership sound like burdened partnership. I saw the subtle confusion ripple through the Rafid side, the sideways glances, the chairman's brows tightening. When she presented the box, the moment was already gone. The chairman accepted it with the polite smile reserved for strangers. He didn't open it. He didn't respond with the customary phrase that would signal mutual goodwill. The silence after was brief, but it was the kind that fills an entire room. Then Evan turned to me, as if remembering an item on his agenda. "Leora, could you step outside for a moment?" I followed him into the hallway, lined with framed photos of past deals, moments I'd helped build. Now sealed behind glass. HR was waiting at the end, an envelope in hand. "This is effective immediately," Evan said. "We appreciate your contributions." The words were crisp, bureaucratic. There was no acknowledgement of 12 years. No mention of the role I had played in getting us to this table in the first place. When we re-entered the boardroom, so I could collect my things, all eyes were on me. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing my hands shake. Instead, I walked to my chair, lifted my notebook, and looked directly at the chairman. "In Arabic," I said softly. Your words today will be remembered. He paused, then answered in kind. And so will yours? We understand. It was enough. I left the room without glancing back, the echo of our exchange following me down the corridor. The silence wasn't empty. It was weighted, purposeful. Every step carried more than my own resignation. It carried the knowledge of what came next, even if no one else in that building had realized it yet. That night, the city outside my apartment window moved at its usual pace, cars threading through downtown, the faint hum of traffic lights cycling from green to red. Inside, the quiet was absolute. I had placed my notebook on the coffee table, unopened, and let the hum of my refrigerator fill the space where other people might put music or television. I didn't call anyone. I didn't write a single email. In this kind of moment, noise is the enemy. Somewhere, in a secure server thousands of miles away, the system handling the Rafid agreement was already processing my absence. Their voice print authentication protocol didn't care about titles or reasons. It only cared about continuity. My name had been coded into the agreement as primary liaison. That meant every step, from initial handshake to final signature, had been tied to my identity and my voice. When HR removed me from Weston and Daughtry's employee directory, it wasn't just a line on a spreadsheet disappearing. It was a trigger. At 8:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with an encrypted notification from the system. The screen displayed only one line: primary removed. Protocol 9 engaged. No explanations, no dramatics, just the cold precision of a rule being followed. Protocol 9 meant immediate suspension of all pending contract authorizations until a qualified, verified liaison replaced the removed party. And given the terms I'd read in the fine print, that replacement process would take weeks, if it happened at all. I set the phone back down. The corners of my mouth didn't move, but I felt the weight of the moment settle in my chest. This wasn't revenge in the cinematic sense. No grand declarations, no public humiliation. This was a quiet, inevitable consequence, written into the very bones of the agreement they had been so eager to rush. At 9:13 p.m., another buzz. This one wasn't from the system. It was a private message from a junior legal assistant at Rafid, a young man I'd met on my second trip to Riyadh, who'd once told me my patience in negotiations had saved his job. The message was short. Tomorrow will be interesting. I read it twice, then powered my phone off. Control isn't about forcing outcomes. It's about knowing which outcomes are already in motion and having the discipline to let them arrive without interference. I poured a glass of water, sat back in my chair, and watched the city lights blur into streaks against the dark. In a few hours, people in corner offices would start to panic, meetings would be called, and words like irreversible would begin to circulate. I wouldn't need to say a thing. By the time most of Weston and Daughtry's staff were pouring their first cups of coffee, the damage was already in motion. I was at my kitchen table, barefoot, watching the sunlight creep across the wood grain, when the first alert hit my phone at 9:15 a.m. Rafid Holdings withdraws from 2.5B agreement with Weston and Daughtry, citing contract continuity breach. The language was diplomatic, regret, unforeseen circumstances, but the meaning was razor-sharp. The market understood immediately. Within minutes, Weston's stock dropped 8%, then 12%. By the time I refreshed again, it had slid past 14%. I sipped my coffee slowly. The world was loud, but my apartment was calm. At 9:32 a.m., the first financial news outlet published their analysis. Somehow, though I didn't have to wonder too hard about how, they'd obtained the section of the contract detailing the liaison removal clause. They broke it down in plain language for their readers. Remove the designated liaison mid-process, and the deal self-terminates. No room for appeal, no exceptions. The article spread fast. Investors didn't like the idea of a company missing something so fundamental. especially in a deal of this size. Words like oversight and negligence started appearing in headlines. I imagined Evan's jaw tightening as he read them. The CEO pacing in his office, phones ringing without pause. Then came the clip. It surfaced first on a small Arabic business forum, then leapt to social media within the hour. Someone from the Rafid side had filmed a portion of Thursday's meeting, the part where Fatima, holding my inlaid wooden gift box, stumbled over the speech I had written. The mistranslations were clear to anyone fluent. Lasting trust became delayed trust. Honored partnership warped into burdened partnership. The video was mercilessly captioned and shared with laughing emojis. But beneath the humor was something heavier, a quiet confirmation to our Rafid's peers that Weston had failed a basic cultural respect test. By 10 o'clock, the clip had been viewed over 500,000 times in the Middle East alone. The hashtags translated to "Know Your Partners" and "Details Matter." I leaned back in my chair, letting the steam from my coffee curl against my face. There was no gloating, no need for it. This wasn't about revenge as a spectacle. It was about the precision of a consequence playing out exactly as it was written. Somewhere across the city, people were scrambling, voices raised, strategies rewritten mid-sentence. Here, in the quiet, I could feel the scale of it without needing to see it. It wasn't joy. It wasn't vindictiveness. It was the steady satisfaction of knowing the truth had a way of surfacing, and that sometimes all you had to do was let it rise. By late Friday morning, the headlines had stopped being about the deal and started being about the leadership. The market wasn't just reacting to Rafid's withdrawal, it was demanding an explanation. Weston and Daughtry's board of directors called an emergency session. Investors were patched in from 3 continents. I wasn't in the room, but I'd been in enough of them over the years to picture it. The long mahogany table, the tight-lipped directors, the wall of muted video feeds showing faces framed by the glow of their home offices. Questions would be sharp, voices clipped, no time wasted on politeness. Reports later confirmed what I'd imagined. The CEO was pressed first. How could a continuity clause that basic have been overlooked? Why had the designated liaison been removed at the final stage? He fumbled through an answer about operational restructuring. Then they turned to Evan. Why had he replaced the only fluent Arabic speaker in the company during a negotiation with an Arabic-speaking client? His reply about streamlining processes was met with silence. Then, a single question from one of our largest Middle Eastern investors. Do you even know who Rafid trusted in that room? It wasn't Evan. It never had been. Several of those investors had worked with me personally over the years. They remembered the late-night calls, the careful translations, the way I could untangle a misunderstanding before it turned into an insult. To them, I wasn't just Weston's employee. I was the bridge that made their business possible. And now that bridge was gone. Word reached me by early afternoon through a former colleague. Evan had been told to reach out to me, not the CEO, not HR. Evan himself. I didn't answer the phone when it rang. I didn't return the first text, or the second. I let the silence do the work. A few hours later, a junior associate I'd mentored years ago called. Evan asked me for your number, she said, her voice low, almost apologetic. I gave it to him, but you don't have to. I assured her it was fine. And it was. Because this was the part of the game where you didn't move your piece. You just waited for the other player to realize how few moves they had left. By early evening, Weston's stock had sunk another 3%. The board was in closed-door discussions about leadership changes. I didn't need to push. The weight of their own decisions was doing it for me. Sometimes, real power isn't in the strike. It's in standing still while the other side realizes the ground beneath them is already gone. The invitation came through a formal letter, printed on Rafid Holdings' thick cream stationery, delivered by courier to my apartment the following Monday morning. There was nothing ambiguous about it. No vague, let's catch up. No polite pretenses. They wanted me at their New York office. Tuesday at 10. I arrived 15 minutes early. Their midtown headquarters was a quiet show of power. Marble floors, brushed brass accents, and the faint scent of oud drifting through the air. The receptionist greeted me in Arabic, and I responded in kind. Feeling an ease in the words I hadn't felt since leaving Weston, they led me into a conference room where the chairman himself was waiting, flanked by two senior partners I knew well. We'd spent years building trust over late-night calls, careful negotiations, and small cultural gestures that had nothing to do with contracts, but everything to do with relationships. "Leora," the chairman began, his English measured but warm. "We would like you to join us, not as an employee of another company, but as our exclusive consultant in the United States." I listened, hands folded in my lap, as they outlined the offer. My retainer alone would be twice my old annual salary at Weston. There would be a signing bonus, deposited immediately upon agreement. More importantly, I would have full discretion over how our U.S. engagements were handled. No middlemen. No streamlining from executives who didn't understand the stakes. It wasn't just an offer. It was a recognition. The kind that went beyond numbers. Then the chairman leaned back, studying my face. "Do you know why we withdrew from Weston so quickly?" he asked. I shook my head. "We had been testing them," he said. "We wanted to see if they valued the person who carried the relationship, or if they believed the relationship belonged to the company. When they removed you, they answered our question." The room was still for a moment. I felt a quiet swell inside me, not pride in their failure, but validation that the years I'd invested had been seen for what they were. I thought of Evan's dismissal in the boardroom, his talk of streamlining, his inability to understand that trust isn't a line item. I signed the agreement without hesitation. When we shook hands, the chairman switched back to Arabic. "It is good to work with someone who understands more than the words." Leaving the building, the city felt different, not louder, not brighter, but sharper, as if the edges had come back into focus. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't carrying the weight of being undervalued. I was carrying the weight of being chosen. The Riyadh sun was already high when my car pulled into the sweeping drive of our Rafid Holdings headquarters. The glass facade reflected the desert light in sharp, golden angles, the kind of architecture designed to make visitors straighten their posture before they even reached the door. I stepped out, my heels clicking against the polished stone walkway, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't walking into someone else's company. I was walking into my own future. Inside, the air was cool and scented faintly with sandalwood. The lobby's marble floor mirrored the intricate geometric patterns on the high ceiling. I was greeted not as an accessory to a larger team, but as the person they had chosen, by name, by history, by trust. An attendant guided me to the top floor, where the chairman and senior partners were waiting. We shook hands, exchanged greetings in Arabic, and sat down to discuss the upcoming series of U.S. Middle East trade agreements. This time, there were no interruptions, no one streamlining my words, no one questioning the value of cultural nuance. My recommendations were not just noted, they were implemented on the spot. It was a quiet kind of victory, but it was mine. Across the city, Weston and Daughtry was learning what it meant to miscalculate the cost of arrogance. Word had reached me the night before. The Middle East Trade Council had placed them on an informal blacklist, citing failure to maintain key cultural liaisons as a risk factor. The fallout was swift. Contracts worth over $5 billion in projected revenue over the next 2 years vanished. Competitors moved in within days. And Evan? He was no longer VP of International Operations. The board had moved him into a domestic strategic planning role, an elegant way of saying he would never again be allowed near an international client. I imagined him sitting in a smaller office, his window facing a parking lot instead of a skyline, wondering when exactly the ground had shifted beneath him. I didn't need to gloat. The truth was, I didn't even think about them much anymore. Their world and mine had diverged completely. Later that afternoon, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in the chairman's office, looking out over the city. From this height, the streets looked like fine threads woven into an endless tapestry. Each intersection a decision, each road a possibility. It struck me how different the view looked when you were here by choice, not because someone had granted you permission to stand in the room. I felt it then, something I hadn't in years. Not just relief, but release. The kind that comes when you realize you're no longer carrying the weight of proving yourself to people who were never capable of seeing your worth. When I left the building, the desert heat met me like an open palm. The driver opened the door, but I paused for a moment, taking one last look at the building's gleaming facade. I hadn't just walked into Riyadh that day. I'd walked out of the shadow of 12 years spent building someone else's empire, and into the light of building my own. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's living in a space they said you didn't deserve, doing the work they thought you couldn't, and never needing to look back. If Leora's story resonated with you, tell me what part struck you the most in the comments. Don't forget to like, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next tale of justice served in the most unexpected way.